Hello to everyone, and thank you for joining us. On behalf of Director John Adler at the Bureau of Justice Assistance, I'd like to welcome you to this webinar on community education and creating reasonable expectations with your body-worn camera program. My name is Tom Woodmansey, and I'm a Senior Advisor for CNA, and I work with BJ's Body-Worn Camera Technical Assistance Program, and I'm also a retired police officer. I'm really pleased to be providing the introduction for today's webinar. I think you're going to find it pretty interesting. This webinar is going to focus on why it's important to educate your communities on limitations and benefits of body-worn cameras, as well as how to create some reasonable expectations with these communities and the media, with the goal of hoping to clarify what your capabilities are, including the challenging demands that you may face within your agencies when it comes to body-worn camera requests and release of information. We have heard from agencies and chiefs around the country who have told us that they wish they could have been more proactive and diligent in reaching out to the public to talk about the complexities of their body-worn camera programs, and this is one of the reasons we're hosting this webinar. So the webinar is going to focus on the following topics. We're going to have a discussion on the benefits, the limitations, and best practices of educating the community on body-worn cameras, an explanation of how to better create reasonable expectations with your body-worn cameras, along with discussions of the best practices and lessons that we've learned from the field. You'll hear from Captain Brian White of the Wichita Police Department, along with retired Chief Harold Medlock of the Fayetteville Police Department. We're also fortunate to have Laura McElroy, who has extensive experience with police and best practices regarding outreach to the community and the media. I'd like to now turn it over to John Markovic from the Bureau of Justice Assistance for his opening remarks. John?
Good day. Thanks for the introduction, Tom, and thanks Denise and the CNA team for setting up yet another webinar. As Tom said, my name is John Markovic. I'm a Senior Policy Advisor within the Bureau of Justice Assistance, BJA. One of my main responsibilities is managing the BJA Body-Worn Camera Policy and Implementation Program, otherwise known as BWC TTA. We'll soon launch our solicitation for the 4th year of funding, so stay tuned for that if you're an agency looking for camera funds. Beginning in 2015, BJA began to provide direct support for the implementation of body-worn camera programs through our BWC PIP grant program. This program was intentionally designed to support comprehensive BWC program implementation with two key distinguishing features. One is the development of policy that's deliberate, comprehensive, and that affords broad stakeholder input. The second is integration of BWCs fully into the various dimensions of policing practice. BWCs are an instrument on which officers have to be trained, but they also can be leveraged for training purposes. Using digital footage as a training and feedback tool can assure that the benefits of body-worn cameras are brought to fruition. BWCs, when implemented properly, can improve officer safety, improve citizen safety, reduce use of force incidents, reduce complaints, and improve evidentiary outcomes. Again, if implemented properly. That's important. Tom alluded to the complexities involved that some grantees or some implementers were not first aware of. This is much more than a buy and fly program. We want grantees and we want others in the field to implement body-worn cameras in a thoughtful way. Through this competitive grant program, BJA has provided over almost $60 million in funding to support deployment of over 50,000 body-worn cameras. To date, the BWC PIP grant program has led to cameras being deployed in over 250 agencies across virtually all states and in Puerto Rico. Agencies receiving grants include state, local, and tribal agencies, as well as special jurisdictional police agencies, including those that serve universities and in public school settings. We've also supported deployments by sheriffs who are using body-worn cameras both in the streets and in the jails. And for the first time in 2017, we awarded funds to a state Corrections Department, the New York State Department of Corrections. So across these diverse agencies, large, small, urban, suburban, and rural, BJA and CNA and our TTA providers have learned a great deal. We've relied on some of our most advanced grantees to promote peer-to-peer exchange, and webinars like these are used to convey, capture what we hope is realistic, useful, and compelling information. So today we'll learn how outreach and communication with the community and other stakeholders must be key components of successful body-worn camera implementation. Today's speakers will address how to establish support with the community while keeping expectations grounded in reality. So we'll hear from 2 police executives and 1 seasoned communication strategist. So without further ado, I'll pass it on to our first presenter.
Thanks, John. And I just want to comment that this is another in a series of webinars sponsored by the Bureau of Justice Assistance and coordinated by CNA for the body-worn camera program. We really want to thank the Bureau of Justice Assistance for its investment in the body-worn camera program, the body-worn camera toolkit, and in a range of technical assistance resources and opportunities for agencies around the country who are implementing body-worn cameras. BJA supports state, local, county, and tribal law enforcement agencies in many ways, and we're grateful that they do so. We also want to thank the staff at CNA for their efforts in putting the webinar together. So just a few comments before we kick it off, and I'll introduce the panelists. The webinar is recorded for the benefit of others who may view it later and can see it on your website. And we will give you an opportunity for questions at the end of the webinar. So please make your thoughts and questions known. I'm sure others will appreciate the networking opportunity that the webinar provides. And you can use the chat utility to the right of your screen to post questions and comments. Or you can comment at the end of the webinar, and we'll do our best to respond with some input. Following the webinar, you'll receive a request to evaluate it. Please complete the evaluation and give us your best, honest thoughts and recommendations. And most importantly, let us know what other topics you think we should consider or bring up on future webinars. So, as John mentioned, we're very fortunate to have some outstanding panelists, and let me just give you a little bit of background on who they are. Brian White, Captain White is a 27-year veteran of the Wichita Police Department, and during his career he's had assignments in undercover operations, sex crimes, robbery, homicide investigations, and gang enforcement. Captain White has a Bachelor's of Science from the University of Central Missouri and a mini-master's in Public Administration from Wichita State. Captain White has experience and expertise in body-worn camera implementation and community policing. Laura McElroy. Ms. McElroy has worked in the media as an agency communications director for 26 years. She has dealt with almost every imaginable news story and has a clear understanding of the media and its daily objectives. Laura's worked for 11 years as Tampa Police Department's communications director, where she helped the agency navigate many crises, all while strengthening its community relationships. She is a subject matter expert with the U.S. Department of Justice, Office of Justice Programs, and she works with law enforcement agencies around the country, sharing best practices in crisis communication, media relations, social media, and community outreach. She's trained many police, sheriffs, and corrections commanders as well. And finally, Harold Medlock. Chief Medlock served as the chief of Fayetteville Police Department for nearly 4 years. When he retired in December of 2016, he served for over 2 decades with the Charlotte-Mecklenburg Police Department in a variety of assignments and promoted through the ranks. Chief Medlock has a master's degree and a graduate of the FBI National Institute and the FBI National Academy. Chief Medlock actively served on a number of law enforcement and social issue boards. He was also asked to write and testify before the President's 21st Century Task Force on Policing. He currently serves with CNA as a consultant for body-worn camera and for strategies for policing innovations projects. So before I turn over the panel, I just want to make a comment on the importance of this topic with this webinar. So educating the community and the media on police operations, and especially their limitations and what goes into your decision-making, is a huge challenge, especially in today's current environment. Police are being more proactive and transparent with letting the community have a better understanding about the challenges and limitations that they have. I think this becomes even more important with BWC, since many in the public and the media may be looking to use this technology as a platform to promote their preconceived perceptions of the police. So with that, I'd like to turn it over to Captain White to kick us off. Go ahead, Brian. Thank you.
Thank you, Tom. What I'd like to do real quick is just kind of give a quick overview of the Wichita Police Department and its body-worn camera program. Essentially, in 2009, we started our body-worn camera program with 20 cameras. It was a pilot program, and we did not develop a policy initially. We had a special operations program, and quite frankly, that's not what I would suggest other agencies do. I would suggest that they have their policy in place, and I'll talk about that here in just a moment and how we took those steps. Currently, we have 429 body-worn cameras deployed to our 650 officers, and in 2014 is when really our body-worn camera began to expand. And what happened was we had some controversial shootings that had occurred in the city of Wichita, and there was there's an uprise kind of beginning, a conversation beginning as it relates to those shootings and the department's policy and programming. And the catalyst that kind of tipped the scales for us was the Ferguson shooting in Missouri in 2014. Right after that shooting occurred, again, that was a kind of a tipping point for our organization. There was an uptick in public demonstrations in our community. Things were peaceful. We didn't have any violence, but the conversation was growing. And we had a large community meeting where about 500 people were in attendance. The mayor was there. Our then interim chief of police was there. The city manager was there. And it was hosted and kind of moderated by a ministerial league. There was, again, a growing frustration amongst the crowd about how the agency was progressing. And again, what was the catalyst behind a lot of this conversation was some police shootings that had occurred in prior years. And during this meeting, the mayor made a pledge to the community. And again, the media was there doing a news story. And the mayor made a pledge that in a year's time, and this was in the fall of 2014, so at the end of 2015, a year and a few months later, the police department would have a fully implemented body-worn camera program. So with this pledge, I was at the time just stepping into the role as a subject matter expert for the body-worn camera program. And in that moment, I knew that my workload was going to increase substantially. But what I want to do right now is I want to fast forward to a shooting, an officer-involved shooting that happened on December 1st, 2015. And then I'm going to step back and talk to you about what happened in the year and 3 months prior to that, the community work that we did and building our program to prepare us for this day, for this officer-involved shooting in 2015. So I'm real quickly going to sketch out what happened with that officer-involved shooting. Essentially what happened was there was a double murder, and officers were investigating that double murder. They had stopped a vehicle. A foot pursuit ensued with a subject that fled that vehicle. A teenage male was shot in the back. As officers were chasing him, he was carrying a firearm. And we did an immediate media briefing right after the shooting at the scene and told the community that we would follow up with a lot more information the following morning, and there was no uprising. Why was there no uprising? Why did the community allow us an opportunity to fully prepare and deliver additional facts as it related to what had occurred? And the reason why was what we had done to prepare for this day and for days not as severe or substantial as this, but as the body-worn camera subject matter expert, I had to understand the open records laws as it relates to our agency in the state of Kansas and how those laws would apply specifically to our agency. In understanding those, I needed to pull in some experts myself. I needed to deal with our law department, the district attorney's office, our city prosecutor's office, so I could have a clear understanding of what those laws were and, again, how they apply. The one thing that I want to mention at this point is that, again, now we're in late 2014, and I've been tasked as a subject matter expert, but the conversation is continuing in the community. And what we needed to tell them was we need to prepare ourselves for our conversation. We promise you we will not develop a policy and put it in place until we have had substantial conversations with the community. But we needed to again, prepare ourselves for that engagement. In addition to that, we needed to understand the equipment that we were going to wear, and we needed to narrow that down, select it, and have a strong, comprehensive understanding of what that equipment was capable of and what its limitations were so that we could inform the community. The conversation is not only about getting their feedback and their information, but it's also about educating the community about those records laws and the equipment that you have, what its limitations are. The other thing that you have to do, I think, initially as you're prepared to engage the community is you have to engage your internal stakeholders. And these will be ongoing conversations, but I think it's really important to understand that you don't have one conversation and then the conversation ends. This is an ongoing conversation, but those conversations, of course, are going to include your chief, your command staff, supervision within your agency, the union, support staff, IT, records, again, the prosecutors and the law department, and then government leaders that are part of your community. You can't, you need to make every effort to include all facets of your organization and those stakeholders that touch your organization, because quite frankly, a program like this will reach all those different parts of your organization, and because of that impact across your entire organization, they have comments and suggestions and need to be included in the conversation. So once you've had an opportunity to look within your agency, now you want to engage the community. So, you know, obviously this isn't static. You haven't, agencies don't start community engagement with the beginnings of a body-worn camera program. You already have established relationships and established meetings, and those are the things that you want to build on and work within your community. And those things can be different from agency to agency and community to community. We have a lot of neighborhood watch associations and neighborhood associations that we already attend their meetings. We have what we call district advisory boards. So each district for us, for the council member, has an advisory board, and those are public meetings, and we speak at those frequently. We have Facebook, and we have Twitter. We have a website. But we needed to engage all those frequently used ways to engage the community. But we also needed to have special meetings where we talked about these things specifically. So what we decided to do was, and there are some suggestions that come up later in this webinar that we didn't use that now that I'm aware of, I think would be really important to incorporate. But these are the resources that we used at the time. The other thing that we felt was really important was we had a lot of folks that were our most outspoken community leaders about the body-worn camera policy or police operations as a whole. And what we decided to do is send them our draft policy once we had developed it. Send them a copy of it through email, let them digest it, comment on it, and then send it back to us. And then we needed to sit down with them directly and have a conversation about what their policy suggestions were and how we might tweak or adjust our draft policy, to accommodate some of their suggestions. So some of those groups that we met with were the ACLU, the Sunflower Coalition is a local group for us, the NAACP, the Racial Profiling Board in Wichita, and then we also had some legislators from Kansas that were very involved in this conversation. We felt like we needed to bring them to the table. So during these conversations and their suggestions, we had multiple meetings with them. And what we were working to do is to honestly look at their suggestions and incorporate them into our policy. And again, as I talk about what happened when we first began to put our draft together, we made it quite clear to our community, both through the media and our website, that the policy would not be finalized until we were able to engage the community. So again, you're building trust with the groups that you're meeting with. So once you've had an opportunity to have these meetings, you want to record all this data, you want to collect all this information, and so that you can go back and look later at who you engaged, when you're asked, and what those conversations were, and how you adjusted your policy at a later time. Now, whenever you're having these meetings, you're going to want to clearly discuss the key points of the program, and this is where you need to do your homework. And I talked about this a little bit when I first started, but, what are the Open Records Acts? How will your agency release video? What are the victims' rights as it relates to your body-worn camera video? How will the public have access to your policy? Are all your policies available? How does the storage of the video apply to your agency? How long will it be held? How is it protected from tampering? These are all conversations that they'll be very interested in, and there needs to be consistency in your messaging. So a lot of the meetings that I talked about earlier were meetings that I attended. I had to make myself available to go to many places, and in larger communities, that's difficult for one person to do. And in hindsight, I may have changed how we did business. And again, there's some suggestions later in the webinar that are good suggestions about how to create a consistent messaging with multiple people. So let me go back to our incident that occurred on December 1st, 2015. And again, now we've had that year and a half of policy development, of community engagement, and again, in 2014, there's a lot of unrest in our community, specifically around police shootings. And again, there are a lot of other factors that are related to your policy, but this was clearly a hot button topic for us, and I know it is around the country. So I believe that the work that we did on educating the community and working with the community to build our body-worn camera program is what let us give us an opportunity to have the conversation right after the shooting occurred and the following morning. So some of the more facts and details that we were able to expound on in that next media briefing that occurred that following morning was that this was a double murder that we were investigating. It was a gang shooting. There were 3 shooters in this gang shooting. We had arrested one of them right after the incident occurred, and then we received a tip, a tip that we felt had a lot of validity, and we arrested one of the suspects, the second suspect, based on this tip, and this same tip led us to this incident where we got into the car chase, foot chase, and ended up in the officer-involved shooting. What also became really critical point is that during this foot pursuit, our suspect ran towards a high school and was about 15 yards from entering a high school, and there was a basketball game occurring where several hundred were in attendance for this basketball game. Officers gave loud verbal commands during the foot pursuit to drop the firearm and to give up, but the suspect ignored those commands. Now, we did shoot the suspect in the back, and we also shot him in the hand and actually shot the gun out of his hand, the officer did. And what we decided to do in this particular incident was provide photos of the incident, the firearm that the suspect had, photos around where the scene was, and we also provided a map of the area. And then still, what we decided in this instance, now we've released body-worn camera footage in other instances, but in this particular instance, because it was a foot pursuit and the video was being jarred and moving around so quickly, it was hard to pick out specific moments where you could see that the suspect was carrying a firearm. So we used still photographs in this incident. And again, that goes back to us providing good information to the public on the front end about the limitations of your video and what you can expect from a body-worn camera video. So in the end, there were no demonstrations. There was no pushback. We were allowed the time to put our information together and release it to the community. And I believe strongly that the work that we did over the year and a half or the year and 3 months before this shooting occurred, and that give and take, that information giving to the community was critical to us not having a bad incident, but able to communicate clearly to the community about this particular officer-involved shooting. I will now turn over the presentation to Laura.
Of just getting your community involved and getting them interested so that you can develop a policy that really reflects the values and the concerns of your community. And then next we'll look at how to use video, some examples of using video as a way to show the capabilities of the body-worn cameras, but also just as importantly to show the limitations, as we heard examples from Captain White just now. And finally, we'll review some pointers on dealing with a critical incident after you've rolled out your body-worn camera program, where a portion of it may be recorded or none of it is recorded, or maybe the entire incident is recorded on your body-worn camera. So right from the very beginning, one of the challenges is just getting your public interested in a policy. Unless you've had a recent critical incident in your community that has caused this to be a big debate, lots of times in the very beginning when you start talking policy, people want to take a nap. They're not that interested in getting involved unless, of course, you've had that recent controversy. And so it doesn't change the fact, though, that it's still our responsibility as law enforcement agencies to get the message out and to get the public informed, which means we just have to be creative. We have to think outside the box in ways to get the community to weigh in, because it's all about having a policy that works for the police department, but also works for the citizens who you serve on a daily basis. And so my first suggestion is taking your message social, using social media as a tool. And I'm fully aware that many police chiefs would probably rather face an armed robber or maybe even a whole line of armed robbers than to do a Facebook Live. But I would urge you to give it some consideration. This is a terrific way to reach a very large number of your citizens in one sitting, because people have busy lives and they can't always go to a community meeting, but they can look at their phone and send in a message or send in a concern. And it's really easy to do. It doesn't cost a lot of money. All you need is a microphone that you can buy for less than $50 and a tripod for a smartphone, which again you can buy for $25 to $30 on Amazon. So it's not a big investment. You're live as the chief or as the commander in charge of the program, and then the citizens get to send in their questions on Facebook, and you have your PIO set up to field those questions. And then the example that I'm sharing here is Fort Walton County in Florida, and this is a sheriff who does town hall meetings on a regular basis. He does them on Facebook almost monthly, and the very first question on this particular one happens to be about body-worn cameras. And the beauty of doing this town hall live on social media is people can still go to their kids' soccer games or their school plays and at the same time be involved with your policy development, because it's so easy today to send a message in on Facebook, to send your question in on Facebook. So using social media is critically important, but of course nothing replaces the value of the face-to-face meeting. And so you can have community town hall meetings that are set up just for body-worn cameras. If you have a low turnout, then I would suggest taking your message on the road. Go to the meetings that already have a big turnout, whether it's a civic meeting, a downtown business meeting, if it's a community group that always gets a good turnout, get on their agenda, you have a captive audience there, and then whoever is speaking, whether it's the chief or it's the commander in charge of the program, they can be armed with a flash drive. And that flash drive can have your key points about your policy or the policy that you want the public to weigh in on, and then the frequently asked questions. And the importance of the flash drive is to have consistent messaging, no matter who's talking about it. Maybe it's going to be the sector captain in each area of your community that's going to talk about body-worn cameras at the different neighborhood watch meetings or community meetings. And this way you have consistent messaging, whether the message is coming from the chief or it's coming from another community or another commander. And it's all of these exercises, whether it's on social media or it's these face-to-face meetings, it's all about building that faith and trust with your community and making sure that you are developing a policy that the community feels good about. And I wanted to share this example with you in Allentown, Pennsylvania, where their agency decided to roll out their program at their city council meeting. They tend to have packed city council meetings, so they had a captive audience, and that was a great way to get in front of a large group of their citizens because, as I said in the beginning, it's hard to get them sometimes to come out to a town hall meeting just about body-worn cameras. And so they went where the audience was to roll out their program. Another important step is making sure that you get the media involved. In this photo here, this is an example of Chief Castor and I, when I was at the Tampa Police Department, we made the rounds to all the local media before the Republican National Convention because we wanted to make sure that the media knew how we were going to deal with protesters and how we were going to deal with them covering the protesters. Well, this paid dividends for us when it came time for the convention to actually take place. And I feel very confident that it would pay off for you when a critical incident happens in your community because they get a chance to have a voice, just like going to your community, going to your media who's going to be covering your critical incident and letting them discuss the issues with you, whether it's about the retention and how you're going to handle your public records requests, those key points of when an officer can record, when they have the discretion not to record, when can they view the footage, when can the public view the footage. All of that should be discussed in an open setting. And you can do it by either hosting an open house at your department, or you can make the rounds to the media. And of course, you just have to be prepared. As Captain White said, do your homework, know that policy inside and out, have already decided as a staff and as an organization how you want to handle these issues, or maybe you don't know the answer, and that's why you're having these meetings, is to get that feedback. And another important step is connecting with your critics, and there's different ways to do that. As Captain White said, they emailed out their policies to their critics. We did the same thing in Tampa, sharing it with the NAACP and with the ACLU. But on the front end, before you actually have a draft policy, just like hosting meetings for the media, you can also host a series of small meetings for your critics. And you can either do it at the police department or you can go to their turf where they feel comfortable, whichever you think is most effective for your community. But again, it's all about making sure that they have a voice and letting them know that you value their input and that this is a collaborative effort. And of course, no matter what the issue is in law enforcement, we have to take care of our local politics, meeting with the mayor, meeting with the city manager, or meeting with the city council members. And in Tampa, what we did is we met with each one of our city council members at length, as long as they needed us to be there to answer all their questions. And it was just a one-on-one private meeting so that they had a complete understanding of what we were trying to achieve and a complete understanding of our program and our policy. And another easy step is posting your policy on your website, and not only posting your policy, but also letting the public provide feedback. And whether it's right there on your website or you just give them direction on where they can provide that feedback to make sure it's not a one-way street. You're not just pushing it out, you're also receiving information back. And of course, that's where you would promote your Facebook Live dates, because I know you guys are all ready to host those first Facebook Lives. And then you could also promote where you'll be discussing body-worn cameras at community meetings. A lot of agencies have started using citizen surveys as a way to gauge their relationship with the community, and this can be a very effective way of getting feedback on your policy or on just what issues are important to the community. And I wanted to share with you the example of the Camden County Police Department, because this is an agency that really crossed all its T's and dotted all its I's when it rolled out its body-worn camera policy. And they partnered with NYU with the policing project, which helped them to come up with these ideas, I think, of the most effective way to reach their citizens. And for them, their goal was to make sure that this was a policy of the people. They did the online surveys. They got 181 responses. Then they held 2 community forums, which were widely publicized. They had some controversy in their community and crime problems, so they were able to get a larger turnout. And then 39 more citizens filled out paper copies of that survey, so they had over 200 copies of the survey in the end. And then another important step they took was they held focus groups with some of the officers who were involved in the pilot program. So these are the ways that they reached out to their community, and not only did they reach out to get that input, but after they got the input, then they amended their policy and shared with the community how that public input changed their policy. And that's some of the key points of when officers are going to record, when they can stop recording, and when potential complainants will be able to view footage. So those are some of the issues that every community is going to want to weigh in on. And so they went out, they asked for the public feedback, then they took that feedback and actually amended their policy. So I think the way they handle it really defines collaborative effort in putting together your body-worn camera program. Now, since a picture is worth 1,000 words, I strongly recommend whether you're going out to meet with the public, whether you're holding a Facebook town hall meeting live on Facebook, you're meeting with the media, or you're meeting with your critics, to use video as a way to share your message, to share the message of this is the capability of the program, this is the limitations of the program. And so here's an example that I want to share with you. This is a recent shooting in Sacramento, and it just shows that cameras, because of the physical nature of law enforcement, that a lot of things happen after dark in the law enforcement world. Sometimes lighting is an issue, sometimes because of the dynamic nature of police work, cameras get jostled and don't record everything. So cameras don't always record the whole truth and nothing but the truth. And so this is an example that you could share, or you could find one that works better for your community, that cameras are not going to solve all of our issues between law enforcement and the citizens.
Hey, they run into the backyard. In the next 7 seconds, the officers believe they see Clark with a weapon and start shooting. Shots fired, there goes.
So this first video is to show that cameras are not the panacea. They're not going to solve all the issues. But this next example that I want to share with you is from Canton, Ohio. And what happened in Canton is this is a review that was posted on their Facebook page. And if we look at the text of the review, it is a husband saying, watch out for Officer Jones, badge number 157, that he was a jerk to my wife, that he treated her like trash, that he was disrespectful, and to generally just watch out for this guy. Well, Canton was very proactive. As soon as they read this review, they took very proactive steps in releasing the footage of that interaction. And I want to share this video with you as well, because I think it is a perfect example of sometimes the camera will illuminate the rest of the story.
Hi there. Your driver's license on you. The reason I stopped you today is for your speed, and also you don't have any headlights on. So, all right, hold tight for 1 second. Register go to the car? Yeah. Well, listen, what I'm going to do is, instead of writing you a speeding ticket, I'm just going to hit you for the headlights. That's an equipment violation, so it doesn't cost as much. So just make sure you remember to turn them on, all right? What's that?
So as soon as they played this video, then hundreds of comments flooded their Facebook page with support for that police officer. And that third-party endorsement is just critically important to law enforcement, especially in this post-Ferguson world that we live in. And if you look at the research from Nielsen, it shows us that 92% of people trust online reviews, that most people are reading those reviews before they make a critical purchase in life. And just as important as impacting their purchases can impact their opinion about their police department, because people are definitely talking about your agencies, and so you want to do whatever you can to make sure that they're talking about you in a good way and that they are aware of the whole story and are aware of the good things that you're doing as an agency. So just like the video can illuminate the rest of the story, it can also be a way to correct a false narrative. And I think we all know that an erroneous false post on social media or a portion of a video can really ignite a community. And so I've selected this as another example of the camera can be used to set the record straight. And this is an example out of Daytona Beach where the community was starting to get very angry over an officer-involved shooting because of the false information that was being pushed out. And then they moved very quickly to release the body-worn camera footage, and it worked to their benefit.
Local residents were gathering, enraged over rumors that police had shot the man while he laid in his bed. The video from the body camera showed that the suspect was holding a knife to a woman's chest and threatening to kill her.
Yeah, don't move, guys. Don't move. Got to her throat. You want to be here? Let it go, dude. Let it go. Let it go, man. I'm telling you right now. Don't do it. Okay.
Now, from a community perspective, this is going to be a very graphic video. It's something that you don't want to have to release, but that's a judgment call based on the tense situation that may be building in your community. And each agency has to decide what are the best videos to release. And I think the best way to make that decision is look at the issues that are sparking the most controversy in your community, where you've gotten the feedback from your community, and these are the issues that they care about, and then using videos that illuminate both sides of the issue. So just as important as showing how the video can set the record straight with a traffic stop with an officer-involved shooting, just as important is showing how a video can also illuminate when an officer has violated a policy. And this is an example I want to share with you out of Colorado, where the department released the video when the officer violated policy.
An officer tries to arrest an anti-police protester chasing him through the streets, through a parking lot, and back through traffic, until another officer puts a stop to it.
He's under arrest. For what? For trespassing and for disorderly conduct.
His own camera caught him shooting his taser at a protester. The department said what he did violated policy.
So in this situation, it was a violation of a policy, The next video that I want to share with you from Las Vegas is an example of where violating that policy resulted in an in-custody death, and how releasing the footage during a critical incident can be a way to maintain control over the messaging and making sure that you keep the peace in your community. And again, you have to decide as an organization, what are going to be the best videos that illuminate the points that you want to make. And I think one of the major issues that the community is in support of body-worn cameras is they do want to see transparency and they do want to see accountability. And so this release of this video in Vegas definitely demonstrates that. In the first few seconds there's no audio, but eventually the audio turns on as well. So this is a video of an individual who's tased 7 times, who was unarmed, and ultimately the officer used a rear chokehold that was not authorized by the department, and the subject died in custody. This is definitely something that could have sparked a lot of unrest and debate in Vegas, but because they were so transparent and released everything and took very quick action to hold that officer accountable, I believe that played a key role in making sure that the situation didn't get out of control. And so the next topic that I wanted to discuss with you is dealing with the public and dealing with the media when you have a critical incident that a portion of it or all of it is caught on body-worn cameras. No matter what steps you take on the front end to inform your public, there is going to be an expectation that they're going to have the right to view the video. It's the way people live today. They live their lives out loud and online. They share everything publicly, and a lot of critical issues are debated in social media today. And so as a result, there is this expectation that they will be able to eventually see the video. And so I strongly urge that you have discretion in your policy, that the chief can make the decision when necessary to release that video, that is a tool on your tool belt, that if you need to release it, that you can take that step, and that's built right into your policy. And because today anyone can be a journalist and anyone can be out there recording your critical incident, you have to act fast, especially when a portion of your incident may end up out there on social media via a cell phone video. And so you've got to take steps very quickly to prevent that false narrative from taking root and causing unrest in your community. And you can do that by tweeting and posting out the details of the incident. Now, historically in law enforcement, we want to wait, especially with a critical incident, until we have all of our ducks in a row. We know exactly what happened from A to Z, and then we put together a formal news release that has been vetted up through the chain of command. But the reality is that takes hours. And during those hours, people are talking about your critical incident online and maybe sharing a portion of it with cell phone video. And so we've seen agencies around the country that have very effectively managed their critical incident by just verifying a nugget of information, of checking the facts and checking it twice, making sure that you have this information verified, and then tweeting it out so that you establish yourself as the voice, you establish yourself as the official source of information on your critical incident. Because if you're not talking about it, somebody else is going to be talking about it for you, and they're going to get it wrong. So if you're using social media as a tool to tweet and to post about your incident, and then when necessary, releasing either still photos from that footage, releasing a portion of the video, or releasing the entire thing. Of just acting quickly, establishing your agency as the voice, getting your message out there, and when necessary, using video as a way to get your message out as well. Now, the final video that I want to share with you today is another way that you can step outside our comfort zone and do something proactive that can show the rest of the story. And what we did in Tampa is we put together a compilation of videos from body-worn cameras that show the other side of policing, all the good things that officers do to go out of their way to help others. It also showed some of the tense moments that officers have to face, because we wanted to build empathy for our officers, that they do go out there and put their lives on the line, and they do take risks every day to protect the citizens. And so using video as a way to build empathy was very effective for us. And you can benefit from that by sharing something that another agency has done. You don't have to necessarily share footage from your own agency. So let's go ahead and take a look at this video.
He says the goal is to give a broader view of how officers protect and serve, and they hope when the community sees these clips, it'll help build the public's trust.
All you officers are on the side of this bus station. From rude. Did you not put your ashes of your cigarette on me? Too belligerent. Do you have any questions about the citation? Not from you, I know. The reactions caught on Officer Leonard Taylor's body camera offer a glimpse into his workday. That just happens all the time, every day. Even this, watch what happens at a bank when a man tries to run away and busts through a locked glass door. This was former Chief Jane Casper's prediction in January 2015.
This is going to be a whole new reality show for the rest of the community.
Oh, she was absolutely dead on when she said that. The videos include a water rescue, chases of some uncooperative people, or an uncooperative alligator. And it shows the helpful moments.
Yeah, we're going to help you out, man.
That don't often make the headlines, like fixing a wheelchair, changing a tire, or tossing a football around with a 6-year-old.
Very good.
Now you get a chance to see the other side. There's a reasoning for a lot of things we do. Taylor says some of these clips may be surprising. It's going to be a reality check for a lot of people. But he hopes most people will focus on these moments, the ones that end in a handshake. I thank you for it.
No problem, sir.
So just to recap, the responsibility really lies with law enforcement to get the public involved, to make sure that they feel they have a voice in your policy, and that you develop a policy that they feel is theirs, that it is reflective of their values, it's reflective of their interests. Because if an agency believes, if a community believes that an agency has shared values with them, they're much more likely to trust you, to work with you, to share information with you. And so how you develop this policy can be an important step in bridging that gap that we're always working on, and bridging that gap between law enforcement and the public. And let this policy and how you develop it be a tool in that constant effort. And you just have to be creative and be persistent, because sometimes the public just doesn't want to weigh in until there's a critical incident, and we really need to get them involved on the front end. And so reaching out to them via social media, making sure that the media has a full and complete understanding, so that they, when they are reporting on your critical incident, that they take into account the things that they learned during that meeting with you on the front end, and just making sure that the public has a voice, and using video as a way to get your message out there. And so at this point, I'd like to turn things over to Chief Harold Metlock, and he's going to be sharing with you his experiences when he was the chief in Fayetteville, North Carolina.
I went into Fayetteville PD as the chief in 2013, really to deal with issues of the community not trusting, not liking the police department, and frankly, the police department not liking and trusting the community. Our department had gone through several years of issues and traffic stops. The term for it in Fayetteville was called driving while black. We are a community of about 250,000 people, about 75,000 soldiers from Fort Bragg, and a department of about 433 officers. So a lot of mistrust, a lot of broken relationships over the years. Great community, a very patriotic place. I started talking about body-worn cameras early in 2013, and I became the spokesman. And so, folks, let me tell you, someone, as Laura said, someone needs to be the champion for your police department in body-worn cameras, really in everything, but we're talking about body-worn cameras today, and that person, in my mind, should be the police chief. That person needs to be educated on the benefits and the issues involved with body-worn cameras, the limitations that body-worn cameras bring, but also the benefits of building trust. They have to be a true believer in the technology. In 2013, as you probably remember if you've been in this business a while, things were still fairly new with the industry. And so we began in 2013 talking about it, but we also began doing testing and evaluation of different products. Now, we went about it, some of you might think, in a bit of a backwards position. I did it for a couple of reasons. First, we wanted to find out what worked and what didn't work. The other thing that we were doing was promoting our belief in body-worn cameras and it helping us to build relationships and build trust with the community. You can have the greatest body-worn camera program in the world, but if your community doesn't like you or doesn't trust you, all it's going to do is serve the purposes of those folks who oppose you constantly. So, again, we started doing a lot of work with this, testing it, putting the different products on our officers, letting them field test it, letting them answer questions and inquiries from the community, and it really started to generate some interest. The problem with what we were doing was we had no way to fund it. We had no, at that time, 13 and 14, we had no funding through the budget. We had no ability to receive or obtain grants. We simply knew that we were going to implement this technology with our officers at some point. The other thing it did as we did this and continued to talk about it and show it in the community was build the expectation from the community that we're going to find a way to do it. We're going to implement this program. We talked about money. When folks asked what we anticipated the cost to be, I would say between $1.5 million and $2 million to start up, and probably $1 million a year to continue the program. That really helped us get over some sticker shock, but it also put the conversation back to the community on how we're going to fund this product. So we had to be consistent with our message. It was easy because at that time I really was the out front person. I was attending dozens and dozens of community watch meetings and community meetings across the city, engaging the community, answering their questions, talking about how we were going to change the way we policed and change the way we looked at our community. I need to talk to you now a little bit about what or how I define community. It's not the police and the community. I believe that the definition of community includes the people that we serve and the police. So when I talk about the community, I talk about talking to my officers, and talking to our community leaders, but also our community members. Police and the public are not exclusive to one another. We've heard that for about 3 decades now. We need to continue to think about it that way. Again, as I shared, we publicly presented a body-worn camera program that we did not have at every opportunity, at our community watches, public meetings, civic presentations, the City Council, County Commission, to the bar, to our medical and educational communities. I presented one time to our Cumberland County Defense Bar, and one of those folks asked me why I was there and why I was presenting body-worn cameras to them and why I thought it was a good idea. And I kind of laughed at that question, and I said, but surely you, as a defense bar, want the true facts of what the interactions between our officers and suspects will bring about. So surely we're trying to get to the truth and the facts of the case. And I would think that of any group in Cumberland County, which is where Fayetteville was, who would support this program and probably finance it, would be the defense bar, because I know you want to get to the truth. It wasn't very well received. I thought it was funny. I wanted to engage the department employees. We're in North Carolina, our right-to-work state. I wanted to talk to every officer and every non-sworn employee in the department. And I did that through a series of quarterly briefings that I would share and share any information that my department, my employees wanted to know about the direction of the department. But I also talked a lot about body-worn cameras, the benefits of it, and answered any questions that the officers and the non-sworn employees would have. That reduced anxiety, rumors, and false narratives, not just among the police employees, but also among the community. It was pretty amazing to see people start to get excited, both officers and the public, over this program. So I shared before, we didn't wait for funding to start talking about implementing. We talked about the need and the benefit for 2 years before we identified a funding source. And you know, the more we talked about that and the more we put the funding back to the community, the more appreciative our politicians, our city council was of the work we were doing, because they then were acknowledging the fact, the community was acknowledging the fact that somebody has to pay for this, and it may come from a tax increase. Ultimately, we didn't have to do that. We sought funding from every source, from our budget, from the politicians, of course, civic groups, foundations, and asset forfeiture. Let me tell you, we had a police foundation that in 2014 was working very hard, but we didn't have a lot of money. And our anticipation, our expectation was that we would have to fund this program from asset forfeiture and from our police foundation. As it turned out, we didn't have to do either. I touted the asset forfeiture to the community as saying drug dealers and criminals are going to actually finance or fund the body-worn camera program. And it generated a lot of support for us as we move forward to try to find funding sources. Now I have to tell you that Fayetteville PD was in the 2015 grant group that received the BJA award in 2015. Through a matching grant, we were able to outfit all of our 433 officers with body-worn cameras through that grant. So it was great for us, but it also helped us in working through the match through our budget with our city leaders to help fund this. We set a lot of enthusiasm and set great expectations from everyone. We touted some of the success stories of our officers who were wearing them, who either had a complaint or had a great day, and were able to share not necessarily the video, but we were actually able to narrate a lot of those encounters. And another thing that the officers who were our test mules for this technology did was be able to share their success stories with employees in the department, which really eliminated a lot of the angst and anxiety in the community. Now, I need to talk about the media, although I consider Laura, who preceded me, the expert in media, and I have attended many of her seminars, and she is widely respected, and I seek her for advice, but I want to share with you what we did. As we began to test and evaluate these different products, we invited the media to engage with us and actually even wear them in some cases for their news story, the different products. That really allowed us to become somewhat the experts in Eastern North Carolina on body-worn cameras. We were willing to talk about them when no one else would. We were able to share some of the successes, but also our lessons learned and limitations with the body-worn camera. We let them do interviews with our officers, and we invited them to our meetings, our public meetings, and all of our meetings are public. So they had free reign to interview not just our officers, but folks who were attending and get their input. We did everything we could to pitch stories to the media. And you know, the media is quick to complain that they only do bad stories about police because we don't give them good stories. And I'm a big believer in feeding the media. So we would invite them to everything, especially with body-worn cameras, as they were new to Eastern North Carolina. And that became our opportunity to become the expert agency. So when something happened in North Carolina to Fayetteville or another department in the state, or as an example, what happened in Ferguson in 2014, we weren't at that point deployed with body-worn cameras, but we were sought out for our opinion on how body-worn cameras may have changed the outcome of that incident. And so, but what that did was allow me to frame the message and really go away from what happened in Ferguson to the benefits of body-worn cameras for Fayetteville, North Carolina. So again, when no one else was talking, no other police departments or law enforcement agencies were talking in North Carolina about body-worn cameras, Fayetteville PD became the go-to people for our media in that market to comment on stories involving body-worn cameras, but then how those products may have impacted the outcome of something that occurred somewhere else. Don't be afraid to comment. In general, on national stories involving body-worn cameras, become the expert, but frame your message. Always turn it back to the benefits of what it will do for your community and your department. And then we engaged our perceived critics. And the reason I say perceived is because, you know, people are different or looked at differently from different venues. So I'm going to speak from the police department perspective in Fayetteville. We had a group of pastors that were many would consider opposed to us and the things that we were doing over the years, and had many complaints, and some of them were very justified. So we had our outreach meetings. You know, I'll go back and share this with you before the pastors. The first focus group meeting we had for the community in body-worn cameras, that was a requirement of the 2015 grant. We had about 30 people show up. And I started the meeting by saying, you know, I'm disappointed with the outcome or the turnout of the community for this meeting. And one of the old guys in the room stood up, and when I say old guys, he was well up in his 70s. And he raised his hand, stood up, and he said, well, shoot, Chief, you've been talking about this for 2 years. I think everybody's about tired of hearing about it. Let's get on with it. And that was encouraging to me. But what we did was have 3 focus group meetings for the community. And then we did an outreach to our pastors in Fayetteville. We have a very strong faith community there. And we reached out, invited all of the ministers, the faith community, from every denomination, every faith, to come to the police department one day for lunch. I have to share with you, I'm the son of a Baptist minister, and there's nothing that will get a preacher to a meeting quicker than feeding them. So we fed them. They came. We had a great meeting. We went through our policy with them. We allowed them to throw questions and comments and criticisms at us, and really they helped us as a community did frame and build our policy. So don't be afraid to look at the formal and informal leaders in your community. Throw it out there. Let them make comment. Let them be critical, and just ask them to be constructively critical. The advocacy groups, many folks would be afraid to invite groups such as the NAACP or the Southern Coalition for Justice in to have a look at the policy. We had a very good relationship early on in 2014 with our local NAACP chapter, and they really helped us develop the policy and comment on it all the way through. One of the groups that we forgot in all that we did, and I think Brian talked about it earlier, was the ACLU. So shortly after we put our draft policy out on our website, my police attorney ran in my office one day with his hair on fire and said, "Chief, the ACLU's on the phone and they want a copy of our policy." And I said, "Well, tell them to go to the website and download it. It's out there for anyone to view." So he went back, did that. All is good. A couple of weeks later, he comes flying in my office again, all wigged out, and says, "Chief, the ACLU has sent us a 2-page letter with changes they want to make to our policy." And he said, "How do we respond?" And I said, "Well, let's just invite him in. Let's have a conversation." So we sat down with those folks for 2 hours. We explained why we were doing some of the things that we were doing. They told us why they wanted us to make some changes, which essentially at that time was just to catch police officers doing bad things. And we shared with them why we wouldn't do that. We stood up and had, at the end of that meeting, we had a great working relationship moving forward. And then finally, don't forget your neighborhoods and communities of interest. And I speak to that because we have in Fayetteville a large Native American community that is generally mistrustful of law enforcement. We have a huge Asian community of interest that, frankly, is a community to itself, and again, a very wide-ranging international community. So don't forget those folks, because in a lot of cases, they are mistrustful within their community of police in general. Invite them in. It gives you a topic to start a discussion and a relationship. And folks, the last thing that I'm going to leave with you today is this: relationships. And if you do not get out and meet people, if you do not start to build a relationship, you can't build trust. And if you don't have trust, you can have the greatest technology in the world, and it's not going to work for you. My final story with you, or illustration and story with you today, is this. In 2016, the very end of the year, we had a guy who murdered his wife and did it in a very gruesome way with a knife. His little 9-year-old son ran out of the house, called 911. Our officers respond, and when they went in the house, they forced entry into the house because, of course, the woman is being murdered. The guy is standing over this woman with a knife. There's blood everywhere. They attempted to tase him. He fought through the taser, lunged at one of the officers with a knife. They were forced to use deadly force and take the man's life. All of that was caught on 3 different body cameras of officers. We were able to get in front of the community, and we had the relationship with them at that point to be able to say, this was caught on body-worn camera. It is very gruesome, it was very grotesque, and we're not going to show it to you, but here's what happened. And so we were able to narrate that incident, and we never had a question from that point. It's all about relationships. The technology supports the relationships, be the expert, be out front, talk about it often, generate some enthusiasm. Tom, back to you.
Great, Chief. Thank you. And thank you, Laura and Captain White, for some excellent information. Appreciate it greatly. So we had some pre-webinar questions come in, but I think the panel has more than answered these. But I will throw a couple questions at them with the remaining time before we wrap up. One question is, what advice can you give when the DA's office tells us not to release any video in a criminal case, but we know it might help to ease tensions in the community and make people safer? And Laura, you commented a little bit on this, but let's throw it out to all three of you again.
Relationship with their district attorney, or, oh, their attorney.
Can hear you now, Laura.
Okay, you guys can hear me okay? Sorry about that.
Yeah,
I mean, obviously, police chiefs have a relationship with their district attorney, their state attorney, and I think that this may be the time when you have potential unrest in your community. The last thing you want is the protesters to get on buses and come to your community, and the DA doesn't want that either. And so having that relationship ahead of time with your district attorney and then sitting down with them at the time of the incident and saying, and negotiating, what if we release this portion? What if we release these still photos? Coming up with a compromise together. There can be a steadfast rule from the DA. We don't want evidence released of an ongoing prosecution, but we all speak the English language, and we know there's an exception to every rule. And so having that relationship on the front end, as Chief Metlock talked about, and then sitting down to the table with them during the crisis and negotiating what you can release. Usually you can find a compromise that serves both your interests, protecting the integrity of the investigation and making sure that you're preserving the peace in your community.
Thank you, Laura.
Tom,
any comments, Chief or Captain? Go ahead, please. Yes.
Yeah, Tom, this is Harold. I agree with Laura. I'll tell you, though, where this really, I think where we really have to think this through is certainly in the criminal piece of it, but you're also going to have your city attorney and your police attorney, if you have one, that will be advocating not to release information or the video because we're going to get sued. Well, we're going to get sued anyway. And so, and what has happened, and I would rather be standing in a press conference, I would rather be standing in a press conference narrating that video the day after or 2 days after or a week after as the police chief explaining what is being seen there than I would have some young breathless reporter that's trying to make a name for themselves do it in a dramatic fashion. You know, sometimes we're wrong, and I think sometimes we have to say, you know what, folks, this looks bad, we're investigating it, and we can't put lipstick on this pig, and forgive the humor there, but we have to deal with it straight on. I would rather be the person speaking to it than I would to just simply release it and walk away and let somebody else be that narrator, that commentator.
Tom, I would add one thing. I think.
Go ahead, Captain.
Yeah, I would say everything that was stated before me, I would agree with. I think the one thing that I would add is that we always consult the district attorney, even on clear-cut cases. So we're constantly having that conversation. And they were part of our policy building on the front end, and we had conversations about this long before we had to dig into some of these tough issues of releasing the video. And there will be times, and we've had these times where we do disagree. But generally speaking, it comes back to what Laura said is compromising and working through those issues, because the majority of the time, all parties will generally agree on the final product. But it's having those conversations and compromising and working back and forth. But the last thing you want to do is not comment at all or not show anything at all. And all folks that are involved with that conversation will want to have some sort of media release in the end.
Great, thanks, Brian. Let me keep the next question right with you to start off with, and just briefly, and I think this will go to the type of jurisdiction and the capacity of the agency, but the question is, does it have to be the chief who does the community outreach and education? It was mentioned earlier that this communication has to be ongoing, but can somebody be assigned to do this? So go ahead, Brian. What are your thoughts?
Sure. Yeah, that was my role for our agency. I think that the chief hit it right on the head when he said it's got to be somebody that really advocates for it and really becomes very familiar with it. And I think all agencies are built a little bit differently, and does the chief have the time and the ability to manage that? Do they want to delegate that role? But I also think Laura had a really important piece to add here as well, is that I thought that I didn't think of at the time. I felt like I had to go to all the meetings and I had to be at all the gatherings to maintain this consistent messaging. But I think if you have a meeting, bring your folks together that are going to have this messaging at a variety of community meetings, but build in that flash drive that frames the conversation and then also hits on the key points. The one thing that I would mention is that you also have to tell your folks that if they don't know the answer to a question, they shouldn't just wing it. It's okay to say, I don't know the answer to that, and I'll get back with you. The key thing here is two points. One is that don't make it up or don't wing it, and we need to know who we get back with so we can answer the question in the end. So I think you can delegate it. I think you can, to someone in your agency, but there are ways, as suggested by the other presenters, to manage it.
Thank you. Any other comments from Chief or Laura on that question?
I would say that trust. Oh, go ahead, Laura. Chief. I would say that trust. Okay, I would say that trust starts with the Office of Chief of Police, and it's easiest to put a human face to the Office of the Chief of Police and having the chief out front. And so if you build that trust around the Office of the Chief of Police, then there's the trickle-down effect for the officers who are out on the front line. And so I always put a tremendous amount of energy into building that trust from the top down. And I think having the chief out front is highly, highly valuable to that end. But depending on the size of your agency, it may not be realistic that the chief can be everywhere at all times. And if you're a larger organization, and it's also not realistic that when a question comes up at a public meeting to say, well, we can't, you know, only the chief talks on that topic. So I think it is important to educate your commanders who are out there meeting with your public and making sure that they know what the key points are and the frequently asked questions are, so that maybe your chief is the key spokesperson, but then you have prepared your commanders who are out in those public meetings and dealing with the public to be able to answer those questions. Ideally, it's the chief, but I know logistically it can't always be the chief.
Laura, you're exactly right. I always expected my commanders, those that were responsible for the districts and then for the different bureaus, to attend the committee meetings with me. They got very tired, but they knew the message and they were able to convey it at those times when I was not able to be there. And you know, now that I'm retired, they're doing a great job of continuing that. So the expectation is, to me, always was for me, that my commanders would be able to step up and deliver that consistent message in my absence. I think it's critical, but I think it also instills confidence in the officers in the department of the message, but it instills confidence in the community in the message. We're all believers in this technology, as we should be in all of our policies and everything that we do every day. It should be consistent and it should come from the top.
Great, thank you all. I'll throw just a couple comments out before I turn it over to John to wrap up the webinar. So our goal for the webinar was to provide you with some helpful information and insights on the importance and benefits of educating your communities and media on establishing reasonable expectations of body-worn camera. Though most citizens likely view body-worn camera as just a new technology for the police, I think you've heard that we all know it's far more than that when it comes to policing considerations, the impacts, the expectations, and it makes it even more critical that we understand the complexities and limitations and resources that we need to invest when it comes to implementing your body-worn camera program, and to also educate others on what we already know to be true. So we hope you found this helpful. A reminder to please complete the evaluations. And as I close up my comments, I want to thank Denise Rodriguez and Samantha Reinerson of CNA for their leadership and all behind work of this webinar that went into orchestrating it. And I want to again thank our panelists, and then especially BJA and John Markovic for making this webinar possible. John, I'm turning it over to you for closing comments, and thank you.
Great, Tom, thanks. And I'd also like to echo the thanks to Denise and Samantha for pulling this all together. There's a lot of work behind the scenes, as you say. I thought this was very interesting, very compelling, and useful information for those who participated in the webinar. One of the things that I find interesting is, the community's input on policy, where that's advisable. We know that for agencies that are deploying body-worn cameras, it's pretty much standard issue to patrol officers, but departments vary to the degree in which they issue cameras to specialized positions and in special circumstances. So I'm thinking things like SWAT, school resource officers, or as Laura mentioned, in special events like the Republican National Convention or any mass gathering where there may be First Amendment rights at play. I can imagine that the public and citizens there may be differences in how they feel. For instance, some parents may feel that using cameras in school with SROs is fine for the same reasons it's fine in the streets. Others may be more concerned about the privacy rights of their children. So I think those are important. I think those point to important reasons why to consult your community, but I could imagine that sometimes the community itself may not agree, and I would think that's somewhere where the law enforcement leadership would have to weigh in and take a role. I was just wondering real quickly, in closing, whether any of you have experienced questions regarding SROs using cameras or sort of First Amendment issues, whether or not there were special policies written about when cameras go on and off in, let's say, a mass demonstration or even just a political rally. Have any of you needed to address those policy concerns?
In Wichita, we have, this is Brian, of course, in Wichita, we do have our SROs wearing body-worn cameras, and this was of concern with the school district and with some families and we had to have meetings to address when the cameras would be turned on, when they would be turned off. And it goes back to the core issues that we talked about earlier, which is communication, a back and forth conversation about the right role for the cameras within the schools. And in the end, we, the school district and families, felt like it was appropriate to have the cameras to ensure that we were accurately collecting information about incidents that occurred. So it turned out to be a good thing, but we got a lot of pushback at first until we had that opportunity to have those conversations.
I think that's great. I think it illustrates, and a good way to close, that you establish your policies, but they're always evolving, and there needs to be a lot of back and forth, not just with the community, but with all the stakeholders of how that policy is working, whether or not unforeseen circumstances or new considerations come into play. So again, thank you all for a great and dynamic webinar. I'm sure people will take a lot away from it. Thank you, Tom. Thanks, Denise. Thanks, Samantha?
Thank you.
I think with that, Tom, we'll close it. Thanks, everyone. And as Tom said, please fill out the feedback and provide information to us on what other webinars you'd like to see.